Thank you guys for coming. We just wanted to give everybody an overview of the leasing process since this is kind of new to this area, and explain to you kind of how the preferences work and how to fill out the application. And then we've got some other speakers that are going to talk about the gear and some of the processes for working a lease. Just make sure when you leave that you check in or check out with Katie and Jesse so that you can get the preference point for attending the pre-application meeting. So what we're here to talk about tonight is the new aquaculture use zone at 4 Mile. So it's 38 1.5 acre parcels. And there's easements between each of those parcels, which means that we'll be taking 38 applications, or we'll be accepting 38 applications. So one of the really important things to remember, I'm sure you guys are all familiar with the shellfish harvesting areas and where to find those, but if you're not, our website's up there, and you can actually get on an email list for when those areas open and close. And those also apply to the aquaculture leases, just like the wild harvest. So when that area is closed, you can go out and work on your lease, but you can't harvest product. So this is just a depiction of the aquaculture of the shellfish harvest area. So you'll have to make sure you know your area is open if you're going to be out on your lease harvesting product. And we'll go over some more of that information. If you're interested in getting on the email list, you can contact Jill. Her email address is here, or you can email me. My cards are up there, and we'll make sure you get on the email notification list. With these parcels, because they're brand new, they have not been surveyed or marked per the requirements. So the 38 applicants are each going to have an individual boundary survey done by a professional surveyor at their cost. There's no grant money available. The department doesn't pay for that. So the applicants that are selected are going to have to pay to have the surveys done. And then also, because this is a water column area, we have to have the area marked per U.S. Coast Guard specifications, which is the 3x3 signs like you see in Alligator Harbor, and there's a marine lantern on the top. But those are installed and maintained at the leaseholder's expense. The rental fees, this is just kind of a breakdown of the rental fees. They're due January 1st of each year, and January 1st every year after that. Because these are 1.5 acres, the lease fees are $86.92. The application fee is $200, and we'll talk about when to submit that. When this application window opens and you put in an application, you're not submitting that fee at this time. As an aquaculture leaseholder, you also have to maintain an aquaculture certificate of registration. You don't have to go ahead and apply for this now. If you're accepted as the lease applicant and you get the survey done, when we send you the full package, there will be an application in there. This does require you to complete that shellfish harvester education, the video that you watch, just like for your ABOHL. It's the same class, so if you've done that, you have to submit that certificate that you've taken it. And the aquaculture certificate is $100 a year. So it renews every July 1. You have to pay the $100 again. One other thing that's important for keeping a lease is an audit. So every year in January, we'll send you paperwork for an audit for the prior year. So right now we're auditing the 2019 calendar year and making sure that the leaseholders are actively working their lease. So what that means is that you're putting 70,000 oysters per acre on your lease. So for 1.5 acres, each year you have to plant at least 105,000 oysters. And you have to include with your audit seed stock purchases and copies of those receipts, and then also the amount harvested. And if you have 2 consecutive years where you don't meet effective cultivation, the lease can be canceled. So it's really important that you complete those. Some of the things that are really important for aquaculture leases, only native species can be stocked. So you can't bring in some West Coast oyster or a different shellfish. It can only be native species. And you can't move oysters from the Atlantic coast. So any states outside of Florida or even the Florida Atlantic coast can't be stocked on Florida's Gulf Coast. It's a disease concern. And any seed that you bring in from out of state, you have to bring in with a health certificate that has to be approved by the division before the seed enters the state of Florida. And then there's some more information about triploids. So if you're going to bring in triploids, they have to come from the Gulf Coast. And that can be Alabama, Louisiana, any of those states. Just some things to keep in mind. If you get the lease, it can't be sold or transferred for 5 years. So when you apply, whatever name you put on the application that we write the contract in, it stays that way for 5 years. So you can't be a year into it and try to sell it to someone else, it's yours. So just some of the things that I went over: make sure you're performing effective cultivation, maintain your lease markers and lanterns, maintain an aquaculture certificate, pay the lease fees, and maintain a current address. If you move or you're not getting mail at a certain address, it's really important that you call us and let us know, because that's how we communicate. So if we send you something that your lease fees are past due and you've moved and you didn't tell us, the lease will most likely be canceled because we haven't been able to get in touch with you. And that's not a good way to lose your lease. So just make sure you let us know. On aquaculture docks, I only throw this in because this is something that we've seen more and more of. If you do want to use your dock for aquaculture, you can grow seed there. It does have to be certified through the division if you're going to use it for aquaculture. So if that's something that anybody's thinking about long term or just an idea, please make sure you talk with our staff about it. So there are copies of the aquaculture application over on the table if anybody's interested. The lease title, which is the third line, is really important. You have to put a name on there. You don't have to put a company name. That's up to you if you want a company name on your lease or not. But whatever you put in the lease title line is who the contract with the state is going to be with. That's how your aquaculture certificate will be titled. That's how everything will be connected. So if you want that in your personal name, make sure you enter that there. If you want it in a company name, make sure you enter that there and make sure it's a company that's registered in SunBiz. You have to be 18 to apply, and for this page you have to complete the entire page 1. You can completely skip page 2 because that's for new areas that haven't been established. On page 3, you're going to pick up right here at part 3 where it talks about the lease development plan. You're going to tell us you're going to use it for commercial activities and what species you're going to be raising. On page 4, you're going to be talking about the type of gear that you're planning to use, a description of it. And then you're going to tell us what your plan is for the 10 years of the lease. So the lease term is for 10 years. You have an option after that 10 years to renew it for another successive 10-year term, and then again for another successive 10-year term, if you continue to meet all the terms and conditions of the lease agreement. So as I said before, 70,000 oysters per acre. So when you complete this part, make sure you enter at least 105,000 oysters planted per year on each of these lines. Or else we're going to come back to you and say, you're not going to be able to meet minimums at what you entered. So that's just something to keep in mind. When we get down here to distribution of your product after harvest, all the shellfish have to be sold to a certified shellfish processor. You can't take them direct to a restaurant. They have to go through a certified processor. And then down here at the bottom, you're just going to give us the dimensions and a better detailed description of the gear that you're proposing to use on your lease. And Charlie's going to talk a little bit about the types of gear that would be allowed to be used on these leases. On page 5, right here, you're going to have to talk about how you're going to mark your gear. So all off-bottom gear, the suspended gear, the floating gear, it has to be marked, has to be identified as yours. There's different types of tags that you can get. If you're interested in that and have questions, Leslie can talk to you a little bit about that. She's got a couple different tag types that you can use. But it's really important that you mark your gear, because if it's lost off the lease site during a storm or something like that, it is your responsibility to retrieve it. And then down here at the bottom, you're going to check the first 4 boxes, sign and date. So that part's pretty easy. As you guys start looking at this application, if you have questions, my business card's over there. Feel free to call me or email me. We also have a link to the application online if you don't want to fill it out by hand. We have a fillable form you can do on your computer. Also with the application, you have to provide a cross-sectional diagram. If you're not great at drawing like me and you just want to draw right on top of this one, you're welcome to. It's just a sketch that you can use. We just want to get an idea of what you're planning to put on the lease site. Then same thing here. If you have pictures of the gear that you want to use, you can provide those. Or some people will just say, oh yeah, this is what I'm going to use. I'm going to use the long line system. So you can provide that too. But all those components have to come with your application for it to be complete. The application window will start on Friday, March 6th and be open for 2 weeks until the 20th. Don't send the $200 lease application fee at this time because we don't know how many applications we're going to get, and I'd rather not take more money from people. So we'll wait until we've selected the 38 people that are going to get the leases to get the application fee. Anybody that sends their application in early or late is going to be sent back. So make sure you wait until the 6th to send it in to me. If you have questions about it, I'm happy to answer them before that. It doesn't matter whether you get it in the first day or the last day. It doesn't help you either way. It's just an open window. And you can apply as an individual or a business, but not as both, and only one application per person. And now to talk a little bit about the preferences. This pre-application meeting is one preference. That's why we're having you guys check in and out. So for attending the meeting, you'll get one preference point. If you're a Franklin County resident, you get a preference point. If you haven't held a 10-year submerged land aquaculture lease, you get a preference point. If you have held an SPL for at least 3 of the last 5 years, and if you've held an ABOHL for at least 3 of the last 10 years, you get preferences. So theoretically, somebody could get 5 preference points. It is your responsibility to make sure any documentation to get these, except for the pre-application meeting, is provided by you within the application window with your application. If you don't send it in until March 21st, it's not going to help you. So you have to have it in during the window. So after the window closes, we'll develop a ranked list of applicants using those preferences. And so all the people that have all 5 preferences will be at the top. And then we'll have tiers, 4 preferences, 3, 2, 1, 0. And then I'll go through and assign random numbers. So the computer just randomly assigns everyone a number, and the lowest number in that top tier gets first pick of a lease parcel until all the parcels are spoken for. So once we've identified the 38 highest ranked applicants, we will allow 15 days for them to provide the $200 application fee. If you don't pay it within the 15 days, I'm going to applicant number 39 and 40, and we'll keep going until we've received the application fee for all 38 blocks. And then we'll hold an open meeting where you pick your parcel. So the person that was ranked highest with the lowest random number will pick first, sequentially through 38. You must be at that meeting to pick your parcel. You can't send a proxy. Say, I'm going to send my wife to pick for me or my son. You must be present. Whoever the applicant is must be present at the meeting to pick. If you can't make it, you'll get whichever parcel is left at the end of the selection. And there's my email and phone number. If you have any questions, feel free to call me or email me. I'm happy to answer questions. If you get your application in before the 20th at the end of the day, I can hopefully respond back to you depending on the volume of applications, but I'll try to let people know I've got everything and you've got 3 preferences. I'll try to let folks know kind of where they stand and if we've got at least a complete application or if there's things that are missing. But if you send it to me at 4:59 on Friday, March 20th, I'm probably not going to be able to do that. So I would recommend that you try to get them in as soon as possible. Do you want me to do questions or do you? Okay. Does anybody have any questions about the application process or preferences or anything?
If you got one down in Alligator Harbor, can you get one up here too?
Yeah, you can. You just won't get that preference for not having a lease. So there is a preference for people that do not currently or have not held an aquaculture lease. So if you have one, you won't get that preference. Yes, sir?
This weighted average system that you put together, is this the same system that you use in other parts of the state, or is it unique to here?
What do you mean by the system? The process?
Is that unique to here, or is that the same as what you've done in other parts of the state?
It varies a little bit by the area. So different areas want different processes. When we did a new area in Cedar Key, they wanted first come, first serve. So whoever got their application in first got the application. But that is an established industry in Cedar Key. It's very different than a new industry. So when we had Alligator Harbor, it was a similar process to this, where we accepted applications in a window, and then we did a random number. And there was preferences for Franklin County residents, things like that. So it kind of depends on the area and what's approved by the Board of Trustees.
What about kind of like the chain of command, like people that steal oysters, you know, they kind of be on top of this?
Only from the preference that I'm assuming you're an SPL holder and you have an ABOHL. Yeah, so if you provide those licenses, you know, as proof to get those preferences, then you've got those 2 points.
About Aquaculture Bay
else allowed.
Yes, sir.
Right.
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
You said that these leases, that we was approved, that you can't sell or get rid of them for 5 years?
Yes, sir.
correct? After that 5 years, can you?
Yes, you can transfer them or sublease them. So for the first 5 years, it's your lease. You're working it. You can't sublease it to somebody or transfer it to someone else.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you have business associates working with you?
You can, but there can't be like money changing hands as, you know, if they're employed by you as the leaseholder, if you had it in a company name, yes. But if you have like a contract that you're subleasing it, you know, to them and there's fees associated with it, then that would be a sublease.
I got one more question.
Yes, sir.
Is this gonna be the only area that y'all lease on this end of the bay? Is this just beginning, phase one? We're gonna have different phases?
Yeah, I mean, right now, this is the only area that's been approved.
Yes, ma'am.
We've looked at multiple areas, but obviously you don't want to have 5 areas open at once. So we'd like to start with this area and see, but there are some other areas, some of the 4 areas that were originally proposed 30 some years ago. Yeah. You know, we've gone back and looked at those and some other areas to find areas that are suitable. So not everywhere is going to be suitable. It has to be an approved or conditionally approved harvest area. There can't be seagrass, there can't be oysters. I mean, it just has to be bare.
Is this area that you're looking at right now, this 4 mile, has it ever been in the past, anything?
It was one of the originally proposed areas.
Okay.
And we put test oysters on there, they were on the bottom though, that's all we could do then, on racks and
Okay.
belts, and it did pretty well compared to 9 Mile and Highway 65 and Unit 4 of St. Louis.
Oh, well, that was my next question.
Yeah, and Charlie's gonna,
Yeah, you just
That
don't.
shut down more than anything.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about the river, but yeah, there's always different risks. Sometimes you have too much river.
yeah, and Charlie's gonna talk about it a little bit too, so I don't want to steal too much of his thunder, but because this area is Gulf sturgeon critical habitat, you can't do anything on the bottom. So it's suspended line and floating gear only. There's no bottom culture.
Portia, very quickly, could you show us the slide with the leases?
Yeah, it's not a great picture, I apologize.
So is it possible, I mean, is this area, could you add a 3rd row on there if necessary, if you find a lot of interest?
No, so this area we've maximized.
It's still limited by seagrass or something?
Yeah, I think in this area there are some in perpetuity leases around the fringes that are, you know, we're trying to stay a certain distance away from some of the existing in perpetuity leases that are there. And then if there is resource or something like that, we build in a buffer. So this is it for this area.
So if we do find that there's high, or you do find that there's high value placed on these leases, what's the process? What are you going to go through to see that the other areas are made available? If we find that everybody in the room wants a lease and then everybody else finds out they want to do
Right.
it too, what's your process for making those available? I'm sure there's something involved, but I'm sure you guys have probably thought it through.
So one of the things we did to identify this area and move forward with this area is work with a stakeholder group locally that can help us avoid conflict, because we don't want to go where commercial fishermen or oystermen are already using. We want to use an area that's not being used by anyone, and that's one of the major concerns. So Carrie and Katie have gone out and looked at multiple areas. They do all our assessments to make sure there's no resource there, and then we bring that back to the stakeholder group and plat it out, and they say, no, there's commercial shrimp, or there's shrimping in this area, we don't like this, remove this area, and just kind of work on the setup of the areas. But we've got at least 2 other potential areas developed, but I think the idea is let's see how this area does and fills out, and if there's considerable interest and people are working the leases and they're doing well, then we can potentially move forward with some of the other areas in the future.
Got one more question.
Yes, sir?
Is there gonna be a limit on how many leases are gonna be available from now on? Like, you've got 3 other areas that this is gonna be your one you're gonna take your example from. You're gonna start to see how this one does. You said there's some other ones that was done back in the past. If this one is successful and more people wanna get into the industry, is that it? I mean, that's all there's gonna be in the county? It's just the ones that y'all have picked out, or is there room for?
There's definitely possibility for other areas. I think what we want to avoid is having leases just sporadically all over the bay.
Why?
There's a lot wrong with that from a marking perspective and from use perspective.
You're not eelgrass, you're not an oyster bed. What's wrong with
Because there's a lot of users of the bay, especially when you start to get into deeper water, there are a lot of
it?
users.
Steering committee. This group of 5 that's making these decisions. How was that appointed?
It was made up by the community. So, I mean, if there is interest and there are additional areas that might be suitable, it's kind of up to the community how much they want or how little they want. Up until this point, there's been a lot of people that didn't want aquaculture here, and now it's changing a little bit and there's interest in it. So that's why we're here, trying to figure out how we can move this forward. So it does depend on existing users and what resources out there, and that's constantly changing.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, I know a lot of different places that could be used that, like I say, that's got nothing to do with some existing oyster bars. There's plenty of them. Like between these port and carry barrel, there's lots of space right there, that could be used. That there's no existing oyster bars that never have been there before.
Yeah, I mean, some of the areas that were originally thought for oyster areas way back when are now filled in with seagrass. So they're not suitable anymore for aquaculture because we can't place leases there. So things are constantly changing and shifting. So those areas aren't suitable anymore. We'll look at other areas.